The first thing I noticed wasn't the pain, or the sterile beeping, or even the dryness in my throat. It was the quiet. Hospitals hum with a kind of mechanical life, but that afternoon, as I blinked into post-anesthesia haze, the room felt hollow, like it had absorbed a silence that didn't belong to machines. She was there, across the room, sitting by the wall, not holding my hand, not watching me, just scrolling on her phone, one leg crossed over the other, as if she were in a waiting room and not beside the man who just came out of surgery. The nurse leaned in and adjusted my foreline with practiced grace. She gave me a soft smile, the kind meant to soothe. "You've got a good patient here," she said, probably trying to break the tension or just fill the air. That's when it happened. My wife let out a sigh, barely audible, but not casual. Her head tilted slightly, and then, with surgical precision, she rolled her eyes. It wasn't meant for the nurse. It wasn't out of boredom. It was something colder. Dismissive. I caught it. So did the woman standing just inside the doorway. Visitor badge. Familiar face. Her friend Julia. I'd seen her at birthdays, backyard cookouts, a baby shower 2 years ago. She wasn't looking at my wife. She was looking at me. Her mouth moved slightly. No sound came, but I read the words. "You deserve better." She didn't stay long. Just left a bag, some food, a card maybe, and gave a tight smile before slipping away. I lay there, heart working harder than it should have. Not from the surgery, but from what I couldn't unsee. My wife didn't look up once, didn't ask how I felt. She just kept scrolling, thumb moving with quiet determination. I told myself I was tired, that I might have misread it, that recovery brings out strange reactions in people. But Julia's face stayed with me longer than the medication ever did. By the time we got home later that evening, I knew the silence wasn't just in the hospital room. It had followed us. It lived between us now. And I couldn't stop hearing those words. "You deserve better." Recovery at home was supposed to be uneventful. Rest, hydrate, follow up in 10 days. The physical pain faded fast. It was never more than a dull ache. But something else lodged deeper. A heaviness that sat behind my ribs, just under the surface of everything. She was present, technically. She brought me soup once, left Tylenol by the bed. But there was no warmth in her movements. No soft check-ins. Her voice stayed flat, like she was reading off a to-do list she didn't want to finish. By the third day, I stopped asking for things. I started timing how long she'd stay in the room before she made up a reason to leave. On average, 7 minutes, sometimes 5. I could have convinced myself she was tired, that the stress of the surgery threw her off. But then I'd remember that hospital moment, the look she gave, and the words from her friend. And everything clicked in a way I didn't want it to. The moment kept replaying in my head, not just her eye roll, but the precision of it, as if she'd been holding that contempt in for months, maybe longer. It didn't happen by accident. It was reflex, but Julia's face stayed with me longer than anything else. I hadn't seen her in months before that visit. She didn't stay long. Just long enough to witness something she clearly hadn't expected, and long enough to say something she probably hadn't planned to. "You deserve better." She mouthed it like a confession, like she'd been holding it in, and seeing that moment broke her silence. I wanted to believe there was another explanation, that it was a misunderstanding, that maybe my wife was having a bad day, or Julia was overstepping. But then I noticed how easily my wife snapped at me over small things. A spoon not rinsed, the sound of the TV too loud, a forgotten water bottle on the nightstand. Her annoyance wasn't sharp, it was habitual. Still, I didn't ask questions. I didn't want to fight. I wanted clarity, and clarity doesn't come from accusations. It comes from watching what people do when they think you're not paying attention. That night, I lay in bed while she scrolled on her phone beside me. I turned my head slowly and studied her face, hoping to feel something: anger, confusion, fear. But all I felt was distance. She never looked up. 3 days later, the patterns started revealing themselves, not with fanfare, not with drama, just quiet shifts that didn't add up. She started leaving earlier for work, saying she was meeting friends after. No names, no specifics. I didn't press her. I just nodded and smiled like a man too distracted with his own healing to notice the unraveling at the edges. But I noticed. She'd come home smelling like someone else's cologne. Not strong, just faint enough to suggest proximity. She started taking her calls in the car, engine off, parked in our driveway for 10 minutes before walking in. I once glanced out the window and saw her gripping the phone tight, head leaned against the steering wheel, whispering something with intensity. When she came in, she smiled like nothing happened and asked if I needed anything. It wasn't what she did. It was what she didn't do. She stopped asking about my day. Stopped touching me, even in passing. There was a time, not long ago, when she'd reach across the couch and rest her hand on my arm without thinking. Now she sat with a full cushion between us, scrolling endlessly, laughing at something on her screen. But never at anything I said. Once, I walked in from the kitchen and caught her switching apps faster than muscle memory should allow. Her face tightened. Not guilt, not panic, just irritation at being interrupted. Still, I didn't ask. I wasn't ready to hear a lie I couldn't unhear. Instead, I watched, documented the inconsistencies in my mind like evidence for a case I hadn't filed yet. There was a text she sent someone. I only saw the preview flash on her lock screen. I missed that. No name. Just a reply bubble. I didn't look further. Not because I didn't care, but because I needed her to keep believing I wasn't watching. The truth doesn't reveal itself under pressure. It slips out when people feel safe lying. And she felt very safe. I wasn't planning confrontation. I was planning clarity. She was pulling away. I wasn't going to chase. I was going to track the direction, quietly, carefully, strategically. A week into my quiet watching, she announced a dinner. Casual, she said. Just a few friends. No special occasion. I nodded, said nothing, kept my voice even. 3 women came, one I barely remembered, one I vaguely liked, and Julia. The moment Julia walked in, our eyes met again. Same subtle hesitation in her step, same unreadable emotion behind her glance. She greeted me with polite warmth, but her eyes held something else, memory. My wife floated through the evening like a hostess on autopilot, pouring wine, brushing past me without acknowledgement, laughing too loud at jokes that didn't land. She didn't sit next to me once. She made introductions like I was an afterthought in my own house. I listened more than I spoke, watched more than I ate. Julia, seated across the table, kept glancing in my direction, not flirtatiously, not with pity, but with something closer to quiet alarm. At one point, while my wife and the others were giggling over something on a phone screen, Julia leaned slightly closer during a lull and asked in a voice just above the hum of conversation, "How's recovery been?" Her tone was loaded. Not casual. Not curious. Better than expected, I said evenly. The physical part, anyway. She nodded slowly, eyes never leaving mine. Then she looked toward my wife and said nothing. But the silence between us spoke volumes. After dessert, I watched from the kitchen doorway as my wife stood with her glass of wine, recounting some work story I didn't recognize. She had the stage. The spotlight. She looked alive, something I hadn't seen in weeks. Only she wasn't sharing that version of herself with me. Julia watched her too, and at one point, her face tightened, just slightly. Disbelief, not at the story, but at the distance. I wondered if she had known my wife this way before, or if she was just now realizing who she'd become. The party wrapped around 10. Hugs, farewells, wine-stained smiles. Julia paused before leaving. She handed me a dish towel someone had used as a makeshift trivet and held it a second too long before releasing it. "Thanks for having us," she said softly. But her eyes said something else. Not pity. Recognition. I watched my wife from the hallway after the door shut. She was humming as she loaded the dishwasher. That's when I realized I wasn't mourning the loss of affection. I was mourning the loss of respect. And that fades slower, but cuts deeper. It happened 2 nights later. No guests, no pretense, just us. And one too many glasses of wine on her end. She moved through the kitchen, loose and unfiltered, narrating aloud while she cleaned. "He's got his routine," she said, half laughing to herself. "His little comforts." Her tone was sharp in a way that sounded rehearsed. A joke she'd told someone else before, someone who'd laughed with her, maybe even encouraged it. I stood in the doorway, holding my glass of water, letting the silence hang. The kind that reveals who people really are. One of the women from the dinner, Alana, I think, chuckled from the living room where she was gathering her bag. It wasn't cruel, just complicit. A laugh that says we're on the same page. But Julia didn't laugh. She stood by the door, keys in hand, coat draped over her arm. Her gaze met mine and didn't shift. Then, slowly, she looked down, not at her shoes, not out of discomfort, but at the space between us. As if acknowledging something too heavy to say aloud. Not shame for what she had done, but shame for what had just been said in front of me. My wife didn't notice the tension. She was rinsing plates, humming under her breath. "He's got his routine," she repeated, mimicking my voice now. "Same mug, same chair, same book." The words weren't vicious. That's what made them worse. They were dismissive, thoughtless, like I was a fixture, background noise to a life she'd outgrown. I didn't respond. I didn't move. Alana gave me an awkward smile on her way out, avoiding eye contact. Julia lingered, just long enough to make it clear that she hadn't misheard, that she'd seen what I saw. Then she gave a quiet, "Take care," and stepped into the night. The door clicked shut, and my wife turned, wiping her hands on a towel. "What?" she asked, catching my stare. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Because in that moment, the weight shifted. I wasn't the one waiting to be chosen anymore. I was watching someone else confirm that I no longer had to be. 3 days passed before I reached out to Julia. Not in anger. Not out of desperation. Just clarity, clean, sharp, and overdue. I kept it simple. A short message: "If you're willing to talk, I'd appreciate it. No drama. Just honesty." She replied within the hour. We met the next morning at a quiet cafe either of us had ever mentioned before. Neutral ground. Safe. She was already seated when I arrived, coffee untouched, hands folded in her lap. She looked up as I approached, and I could see the hesitation in her expression, like she'd debated whether this was a mistake right until I opened the door. I sat across from her. No small talk. No forced smiles. "I'm not here to blame anyone," I said. "I'm not asking for proof or stories. I just want to know if I'm wrong to feel what I feel." She looked down at the table, then back up. "You're not wrong." The words came too fast, reflexive, true. I let the silence expand between us, not to pressure her, just to give space for whatever needed to surface. "I'm not here to make it worse," she added. "But that dinner? That night? That wasn't an accident. That was who she is now." I nodded. My voice stayed level. "Is there someone else?" She didn't answer. But the way she couldn't hold my gaze, that was the answer. What she finally said was softer, more painful than a direct confirmation. "You didn't deserve that dinner," she said. "You didn't deserve the way she talks about you when you're not in the room." My throat tightened. Not from surprise, from the quiet grief of hearing aloud what I already knew. "Does she talk about me often?" Julia hesitated. "She performs. When people are around, she plays the role. But in smaller groups? It's different. Like she's trying to convince herself that she's settled." I didn't flinch. I just took another sip of my coffee and let the words settle where they landed. I stood to leave before the conversation turned into something it didn't need to be. "Thank you," I said simply. Julia didn't reach out. Didn't follow me to the door. She just whispered as I passed, "You've been quiet for too long." And she was right. But quiet is not the same as passive. Some silences are just preparation. I didn't search her phone. I didn't ask questions she could dodge. But the universe, for once, didn't require my effort. The proof came casually, almost carelessly. 4 days after my conversation with Julia, I was scrolling through social media, not looking for anything, just numbing the ache. That's when her name appeared in a tagged photo, one of those team-building office outings they love to post for culture points. She wasn't front and center, but she was there, half-turned toward a man I recognized vaguely from her stories. Marketing guy. Too smooth by half. The caption said something forgettable, but the date caught my eye. 2 weeks before my surgery. I clicked through the rest of the album. There were a dozen shots, group lunches, staged meetings, silly poses. But only one photo mattered. The one where she was laughing at something he whispered to her, her hand on his forearm like it belonged there. Too close. Too comfortable. Too familiar for the timeline I'd been told. I didn't screen capture it. Didn't send it to myself. I didn't need to. I just stared at it until I understood something simple and devastating. Whatever was happening now had already started then. Before the surgery. Before the distance. Before her sigh in that hospital room. This wasn't her falling out of love. This was her rearranging her life, and expecting me not to notice. She hadn't just grown distant. She'd built a new warmth elsewhere and assumed I'd keep orbiting out of habit. I closed the app. Didn't confront her. Didn't ask, because asking would have given her another chance to twist it. And I had moved past giving her opportunities to rewrite what was already etched into my memory. I didn't sleep much that night. But I didn't feel restless either. What I felt was readiness. The part of me that still hoped, still waited, had finally gone still. And in its place, something stronger settled in. Not revenge. Not rage. Resolution. From the outside, nothing changed. We still shared the same kitchen, the same bed, the same calendar pinned to the fridge. But internally, the weight shifted. And I began pulling away, not out of spite, but out of clarity. I stopped asking where she was going. Stopped waiting up. Stopped sharing anything she could twist into ammunition or obligation. When she spoke to me, I listened without reacting. When she laughed into her phone across the room, I didn't flinch. I let her believe I was distracted, still healing, still unaware. She relaxed into it, grew bolder. I started tracking the practical things, bank statements, digital paperwork, documents she hadn't looked at in years. Quietly, I redirected mail to a P.O. box she didn't know existed. Rented a small, furnished apartment under my own name. Nothing extravagant, just clean, simple, mine. I told no one. Not even my brother. That was the discipline of it. When betrayal goes deep, healing can't be loud. One night, she came home late, eyes glassy, perfume too strong. She didn't apologize, just tossed her bag on the counter and asked if I had any leftovers. I pointed toward the fridge without speaking. She smirked. "You're quiet these days." I nodded. "I know." And that was it. No argument, no confrontation. She didn't ask more, because deep down, I think she preferred it that way. My silence made space for her to believe there would be no cost. But I wasn't angry anymore. Anger is a live wire. What I felt now was colder, more stable. The kind of clarity that doesn't flinch, doesn't raise its voice, doesn't warn. It just prepares. I changed my emergency contact at the doctor's office, removed her from shared cloud accounts, printed everything I need for legal protections, quietly, from a library computer. Every step I took wasn't about hurting her. It was about making sure she didn't get to define how this ended. The confrontation would come. But not as a scene. It would be quiet. Just like her eye roll. Just like my exit. She chose a Tuesday night, because of course she did. Random. Undramatic. Intentional in its casualness. "I think I need space," she said, standing by the sink with a glass of wine she hadn't touched. Her tone was rehearsed, but not practiced enough to sound natural. I didn't blink. "I agree," she faltered. Just slightly. Her grip on the stem of the glass adjusted, like she hadn't expected me to agree so easily. "I mean, maybe we've just drifted," she added. "I don't know. Things feel off." I gave a quiet nod. "They've been off for a while." She tilted her head, studying me, like she was trying to read behind my words. "You're not going to fight me on this?" I met her gaze directly, steady. "No. Seriously?" she asked, her voice breaking into a defensive laugh. "You're not even going to ask why?" I placed my keys on the counter gently. "I already did that. Weeks ago. You just didn't hear it." Her expression tightened. "So what now? You're just going to move out?" I exhaled slowly. "Already found a place. Just a temporary apartment. Quiet. Clean." The silence that followed wasn't angry. It was something colder. Confused pride bruised by unexpected control. "I thought you'd fight for this," she said, her voice quieter now. I looked at her, not with hate, but with a clarity I'd earned. "You don't fight for what already left." She looked away then. Into the window, out into the dark. Her reflection didn't blink. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she offered weakly. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have words, but because her words didn't carry weight anymore. I turned and began gathering the last of what I needed. Just a bag, some papers, my watch from the nightstand. No dramatics, no slammed doors, only one line, as I reached the threshold. "Take care of yourself," and then I left. Not broken. Not lost. Just done. It was 2 days after I left when Julia showed up. No call, no text. Just a quiet knock on the door of the apartment she wasn't supposed to know about. I opened it slowly, expecting a delivery. She stood there holding a folded sweater, mine, left behind at the dinner. "Of course it was. I figured you might want it back," she said softly, eyes scanning the small, clean space behind me. I stepped aside and let her in. She didn't linger near the door. She walked a few feet in, took one slow look around. Nothing extravagant, just mine. She placed the sweater on the counter gently. "She doesn't know I'm here," I figured. Julia nodded, then hesitated. Her hand hovered near the fabric, like she wasn't sure she was done yet. Then she turned and looked at me, straight on. I said it then, and I'll say it now, she said, voice steady. You deserve better. I didn't interrupt. I let her finish. She knows it too. That's why she flinched every time you looked calm. I blinked once, absorbing that. Not because I needed it, but because someone finally said it aloud. She's not used to consequences that don't yell, Julia added, quieter now. You leaving without a scene? That's going to echo longer than anything you could have shouted. I leaned back against the counter, arms crossed. I wasn't going to give her the performance she expected. She almost smiled. Almost. She'll spin it, she warned. Say you gave up. Say you were cold. I don't need to rewrite the story, I said. I just need to stop living in hers. Julia gave a small nod, then turned toward the door. She paused, hand on the knob. She's been quieter too, she said. People notice. Let them, I replied. As she left, she didn't offer advice or sympathy. Just one last glance, respect, not pity, and then I was alone again. But this time, the room didn't feel empty. It felt mine. The first sign came 2 weeks later, harmless, almost forgettable. She liked one of my old photos. A hiking trail from last year. Nothing romantic. Just distance and silence wrapped in pine trees. Then another like. A comment from her on someone else's post that I happened to appear in. Glad to see you out. No heart emoji. Just a gentle tap on the glass to see if I'd look back. I didn't respond. Not out of cruelty. Just completion. She started posting vague reflections, screenshots of podcasts about healing, captions about growth, and recognizing your part. Always just vague enough to avoid accountability. Always just public enough to draw sympathy. Mutual friends reached out subtly. Hey, saw you moved, everything good? I kept it simple. Yeah, clean break. Just finding my center again. No one pressed. But I saw their surprise behind polite replies. People weren't used to men walking away without fire or apology. And she? She said nothing directly. No calls, no messages. Just a slow leak of someone realizing the silence wasn't temporary. That there would be no confrontation. No catharsis. No second round. She couldn't argue with a ghost. She couldn't rewrite what I refused to re-enter. She posted a photo a month later, her alone, wine glass in hand, captioned, "Learning to breathe again." I didn't like it. Didn't comment. But I saw it, and I remembered the woman who rolled her eyes while I came out of anesthesia. The one who thought silence was weakness. Now she was learning the truth. Some absences don't beg to be filled. Some just make space for what deserved to exist all along.